Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks for joining us today in this late Friday afternoon. My name is Elis Randberg, and I welcome you today on Tallinna Vesi's webinar. The webinar will be hosted by the Chairman of the Board, Carl Brooks, and Chief Financial Officer, Kristi Ojakäär. First, as always, Carl and Kristi will introduce Tallinna Vesi's financial and operational results for the second quarter of 2020. And then, right after the presentation, we will be answering all of the questions you may have. If you have any questions, please use the question box on the right-hand side of your screens to type them in. We will answer the questions in the order that they're submitted. Now I will give it over to Carl for the operational report, and then later to Kristi. Thank you.
Thank you, Elise, and a very good afternoon, everybody. And thank you for joining us on the Q2 2020 webinar today. Before we get into the usual operational results, we'll just give an update on the COVID-19 situation. I'm very pleased to say that the company responded very well to the COVID-19 crisis. We had no incidents with any of our employees or any impact on our services. The emergency situation actually came to an end on May the 18th in Estonia. And after that date, we slowly phased people back into the offices. More or less, we've got everybody back in work now. All office-based staff are back with us, and operational teams have reverted to normal working practices. However, we are still being cautious. Normally, we would welcome visitors to our plants at Ullamisti and Paljusjärvi, but clearly we need to be cautious, and those excursions and visits have been cancelled for the foreseeable future. We already had some pandemic plans in place for the company, as you would expect for these situations, but clearly we've also learnt a lot, and those plans will be revised with the lessons learnt very quickly. As I'm sure you're all aware, there is talk of a second wave or potentially some more coronavirus reoccurring. So I'd like to think that we could act very quickly and again respond very quickly from the lessons that we learned before. I'm now going to move on to operations. So as usual, well, it's becoming quite normal this. We've had a very good set of operational results for the first two quarters of 2020. The water samples that we take from across the network are 100% compliant, so we've had no sample failures whatsoever. Leakage is a very important target to us. As I've said lots of times before, it's a testament to how quickly we respond and repair our network, and also to where we're investing in the network to replace deteriorated pipes. So our leakage figure remains very low, 12.7%. Interruptions will inevitably occur. We have, I think, over 2,000 kilometres of water and wastewater network. The average interruption time during Q2 was just 3 hours and 3 minutes, which again I think is fantastic performance. Our wastewater treatment plant at Paljusjärvi continues to perform very well. And again, we've had no failures from the samples taken from the final effluent before it leaves the plant. We're also making some big investments this year as well, particularly at Paljusjärvi. We talked about a project in Q1 at Kadaka, a sewer pipe replacement. Very pleased to say that project went very well and that new asset is performing. And also the investment that we're making at Paljusjärvi is making very good progress. In fact, it's making such good progress that we're going to finish the job ahead of schedule, probably 6 months earlier, actually, in fact. So it'll probably finish towards the end of next year if the current schedule is maintained. In terms of customer service, as you know, we do an exit service with our customers, and that continues to be very good at 4.1 out of a as for possible 5. I'm now going to hand you over to Kristi. Kristi will take you through the financial results in a lot more detail. But as Elise mentioned before, we're here to answer any questions you may have at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl, and good afternoon to everyone. I would like to give you the overview of the financial performance of Tallinna Vesi in the second quarter in 2020. After financial highlights, I will give you more detailed overview about sales and costs. First of all, the economic environment has significantly changed in the world and in Estonia, resulting from ongoing coronavirus pandemic. The introduction of restrictions on gathering and movement, which were introduced in Estonia in the middle of March, affected companies in all sectors, and this has affected Tallinna Vesi as well. Tallinna Vesi revenues were negatively impacted by commercial customers' lower consumption, which was partly balanced by higher consumption from private customers within the service area. When the emergency situation in Estonia ended in mid-May, the restrictions that were introduced to counter the pandemic were eased, and step-by-step water consumption started to recover. Aligned to Estonia's macroeconomic forecast, we expect that in a short term there will be a decrease in our water services consumption. Compared to the second quarter in 2019, the total sales revenues decreased by 25.1%, amounting to 12.1 million euros. The sales of water services decreased by 25.9%, or 3.8 million euros, and the construction services by 18.6%, or 0.3 million euros. The gross profit for the second quarter in 2020 was 4.7 million euros, which was lower by 46.2%, or 4.1 million euros, compared to the same period in 2019. The gross profit was mainly impacted by lower water services revenues. In the second quarter in 2020, the operating profit was 4.6 million euros, or 2.0 million euros lower than in the same period in 2019. Operating profit in second quarter in 2020 was positively affected by a reduction in the provision formed for the possible third-party claims, amounting to 1.2 million euros, accompanied by 0.8 million euros lower tariff dispute-related costs. Compared to the second quarter in 2019, the net profit of the company was 2.6 million euros lower, being affected by 0.8 million euros higher dividend payment-related tax cost. We are moving on to the next slides, and I will comment on the changes in revenues and expenses in detail. Total sales revenues for the second quarter of 2020 decreased by 25.1%, amounting to 12.1 million euros. Total revenues from water services were by 25.9%, or 3.8 million euros lower than in the second quarter of 2019, amounting to 10.8 million euros. As new tariffs were applicable from 1st of December 2019, the decrease in water services revenues was driven by lower tariffs from main service area, accompanied by changes in the consumption. The private customers' revenues in main service area decreased compared to the same period in 2019 by 21.9% to 5.1 million euros, driven mainly by, on average, 27% lower tariffs, worth 1.85 million euros. The decrease from tariffs was partly balanced by 6.5% higher domestic consumption, which came from apartment blocks worth 0.4 million euros. The commercial customer revenues in main service area decreased compared to the same period in 2019 by 45.1% to 3.0 million euros. This was driven by on average 35.4% decrease in consumption, accompanied by on average 15% lower tariffs. The total impact on commercial customers' revenues from consumption decrease was minus 1.9 million euros, and from change of tariffs minus 0.5 million euros. Outside service area revenues decreased by 2.5%, amounting to 1.1 million euros. The change was driven by lower new tariffs, balanced by higher water and stormwater disposal from different outside areas. Stormwater volumes from the main service area were higher by 22%, amounting to 1.2 million euros in the second quarter of 2020. Overpollution charges and discharging revenues decreased by 31% to 0.03 million euros. The revenues from construction services showed a decrease of 18.6% or 0.3 million euros compared to the second quarter of last year and amounted to 1.2 million euros. The decrease was mainly related to lower pipe construction services revenues, balanced by higher road construction revenues. Due to changed macroeconomic situation, new developments in Tallinn were delayed, while some larger projects won by the company in 2019 in Tallinn and in other parts of Estonia continued also in the second quarter of this year. This now takes us to the cost. The total cost of goods sold in second quarter of 2020 was at the same level as in 2019, amounting to 7.4 million euros. Direct main production costs in total have decreased by 3.6% or 64,000 euros, mostly due to lower electricity and chemicals cost. Staff costs increased by 9.3% to 1.9 million euros, and the increase was mainly driven by higher number of employees and the change of salaries from the beginning of the year by CPI. Construction services cost decreased by 23.3% to 0.9 million euros and were related to lower construction services revenues mentioned earlier. Other cost of goods sold increased by 9.8% to 1.5 million euros, and this was mainly related to higher sludge disposal and disposal cost and raw water service cost. Administrative and marketing costs decreased by 37.7% to 1.3 million euros, which was related to lower tariff dispute-related legal costs, which last year were resulted from the exit award in June 2019, according to which the company was liable to pay for 25% of Estonian legal costs. Other net income and expenses amounted to a net income of 1.2 million euros compared to net expense of 0.1 million euros in comparative period. The change was mostly impacted by 1.2 million euros decrease in provision for third-party claims in the second quarter of 2020. The provision takes into account difference in between the tariffs approved by the City of Tallinn in 2010 and the tariffs based on the company's estimation, with reservation to the possible fluctuation regarding past 30 months. Lower net financial expenses were related to the revaluation of swap contracts and lower interest costs. It takes us now to the cash flows. The cash position as of end of June is strong. The company cash balance stood at 48.8 million euros, forming 19.5% of the total assets. Compared to the end of last quarter, the cash balance has decreased by end of second quarter by 19.8 million euros. The decrease in cash position is mainly driven by 20 million euros dividend payout in end of June. The biggest contribution to the cash flows comes from the main operations. 6 months 2020 total, the operating cash flow amounted to 11.1 million euros. The company collection of receivables continues to be high, being on 99.7% on average. Net cash flows from investing activities during first 6 months of the year resulted in a cash flow of 4.6 million euros, which is 3.2 million euros more than in the same period last year. Investments into fixed assets have been at 5.5 million euros. The compensation received from the construction of pipes and connection points were 0.7 million euros. The largest investment project in 2020 for the company is the reconstruction of mechanical pre-treatment, and as mentioned earlier, work started at the wastewater treatment plant in January. The company's financing cash flows during 6 months of 2020 were a negative of 22.4 million euros compared to the last year same period, and cash outflow increased by 4.7 million euros, mainly related higher dividend payment.
Thank you, Carl and Kristi. This concludes our presentation for today, and now you are all welcome to ask any questions that may have appeared. So please write your questions in the question box on the right-hand side of your screens. We will be waiting online for a couple of minutes to have a look. Thank you. Okay, so we have our first question from Sander Danil, who asks that the drop in commercial water consumption of 35% year-over-year was rather steep. How was the dynamic month by month in Q2 2020? Please describe your outlook for corporate consumption in the second half of the year. So please.
Christy, are you okay to comment on that in terms of Q2, and maybe I can comment overall?
Yes, thank you, Carl. So the drop in commercial water consumption of 35%, yes, it was really rather steep. However, this is well aligned with the overall situation what was in place in Estonia. So as we know, from mid-March, the restrictions on gathering and movement were introduced. So aligned with this change, we saw a drop in the consumption from mid-March. And since most of the businesses were closed in April, the consumption was, I would say, historically lowest level during the whole April. And then in the mid-May, when restrictions were lifted, we saw gradual increase in the consumption, and we can say that the increase continued in June. So as we were also mentioning in our financial comments in our financial results, that we do expect that the consumption will be somewhat lower as well in a short-term period. However, it is really complicated to estimate the actual consumption result because of the uncertainty in the overall situation, meaning how the pandemic will evolve, what will be the economic impacts overall, because as we now see, that the overall macroeconomic situation affects as well consumption of the water. So with regards to estimation of the second half of the year, we are not able to give out any specific number. However, we expect that the consumption will be lower than last year.
Thanks, Christy. I just perhaps add a comment to that as well. I mean, clearly, a lot of this revenue is linked to the hospitality sector in Tallinn, hotels, spa, and such like. And they are back in business at the moment, and the consumption is there again. But not all visitors are back in Tallinn. We're still not seeing the cruise ships back in Tallinn. Not sure when they will come. So tourism isn't perhaps back where it was previously. And as we can all see and read in the news daily, the COVID pandemic well and truly isn't over, with restrictions coming or changing by the day in different countries. So it'd be very unfair of us to make any future predictions, because it really is very unclear what the COVID future holds at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. So we also have a second question from Sander Danil. Thank you for submitting that. And the other question is, should we assume approximately 1.2 million euros provision reversal every quarter until the full amount goes to zero?
So the short answer here would be that we are planning to review the provision quarterly basis going forward, and our current understanding and expectation is that we will revise it each quarter until amount goes to zero.
Thank you, Christy. Currently, we do not have any other pending questions, but we will be waiting for a while longer in case any of you have any follow-up questions. So please type your questions in. And we also have a third question from Sander Danil regarding the construction activities, whether we see also recovery there in the second half of 2020.
Okay, I can pick that one up. I assume the question is linked to Watercom. Yes, yeah. I mean, we did set quite an ambitious growth target for Watercom this year in terms of external revenues. We were off to a good start, but then the COVID situation came along. I'm not too sure. I mean, I wouldn't want to make any predictions on the construction sector in Estonia. I think it's in a little bit of limbo at the moment. People are waiting to see what to do next. So I think we've made the right call in terms of what we've done so far, but I think it'd be wrong of us to predict in the future. I mean, at the moment, within Watercom, we use a lot of subcontractors for the bigger projects that we do, and clearly what we've done is to switch off that subcontract activity and keep our own staff in Watercom busy wherever possible. So that's our strategy at the moment until the market starts to pick up. But when it will pick up, it remains to be seen. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Once again, we've answered all of the questions that we have currently, but please, this is now your final chance to ask if there's still something you'd like to know. Okay, it seems like we do not have any more questions about the second quarter, so we will be concluding our webinar here. Thank you very much to everybody for participating. The recording of the presentation will be available on the Nasdaq Baltic YouTube channel webinar playlist very shortly, and presentation materials and reports can also be found on Tallinna Vesi's web page. Carl Brooks and Kristi Ojager, thank you both for the overviews. And once again, thank you to all of the participants for coming online this Friday afternoon. Have a good evening, everybody.